We've gotten through a third of the book, and it has only taken a year. No, I'm kidding. It hasn't been a year, I don't think. But these things, they take time if you're going to study them. 8 months? That sounds about right. Isaiah is, apart from the Psalms, the largest book in the Bible. And it is, it's a very full book. All right, so Isaiah chapter 23, we have a new prophecy here. It's the burden of Tyre. You see at the beginning of chapter 23, the first clause, the burden of Tyre. All right, so I'm just going to read it first, and then we will come back and go through it. The burden of Tyre, howl ye ships of Tarshish, for it is laid waste, so that there is no house, no entering in. From the land of Chittim it is revealed to them. Be still, ye inhabitants of the isle, upon whom the merchants of Zidon that pass over the sea have replenished. And by great waters the seed of Sihor, the harvest of the river, is her revenue, and she is a mart of nations. Be thou ashamed, O Zidon, for the sea hath spoken, even the strength of the sea, saying, I travail not, nor bring forth children, neither do I nourish up young men, nor bring up virgins. As at the report concerning Egypt, so shall they be sorely pained at the report of Tyre. Pass ye over to Tarshish, howl ye inhabitants of the isle. Is this your joyous city, whose antiquity is of ancient days? Her own feet shall carry her afar off to sojourn. Who hath taken this counsel against Tyre, the crowning city, whose merchants are princes, whose traffickers are the honorable of the earth? The Lord of hosts hath purposed it, to stain the pride of all glory, and to bring into contempt all the honorable of the earth. Pass through thy land as a river, O daughter of Tarshish. There is no more strength. He stretched out his hand over the sea. He shook the kingdoms. The Lord hath given a commandment against the merchant city to destroy the strongholds thereof. And he said, Thou shalt no more rejoice, O thou oppressed virgin daughter of Zidon. Arise, pass over to Chittim. There also shalt thou have no rest. Behold the land of the Chaldeans. This people was not, till the Assyrian founded it for them that dwell in the wilderness. They set up the towers thereof. They raised up the palaces thereof, and he brought it to ruin. Howl, ye ships of Tarshish, for your strength is laid waste. And it shall come to pass in that day that Tyre shall be forgotten 70 years, according to the days of one king. After the end of 70 years shall Tyre sing as an harlot. Take an harp, go about the city, thou harlot that hast been forgotten, make sweet melody, sing many songs, that thou mayest be remembered. And it shall come to pass after the end of 70 years that the Lord will visit Tyre, and she shall turn to her hire, and shall commit fornication with all the kingdoms of the world upon the face of the earth. And her merchandise and her hire shall be holiness to the Lord. It shall not be treasured nor laid up, for her merchandise shall be for them that dwell before the Lord, to eat sufficiently, and for durable clothing. All right. So, does everyone know what Tyre is? Let's start there. Everyone? What is Tyre? It's a city. It's a Phoenician city. Okay, it's one of two cities, Tyre and Sidon. It's Zidon here with a Z, but Sidon, and you'll see it elsewhere. Those were two cities on the coast, north of Israel. And do you remember when Solomon built the temple, where did he get his cedar from? Anyone remember? You know, he traded. He paid for it. Well, sort of. There was a dispute between him and this guy. Hiram, king of Tyre. That's where he purchased it from. And he also paid for workers to come from the king of Tyre to do the work on the temple, to build it, and his own house as well. So Tyre and Sidon were two cities just north of Israel. They're where today the nation of Lebanon sits. I say nation of Lebanon, it's not really a nation. I mean, it is, but it doesn't have any national cohesiveness anymore. It's been destroyed by terrorists. It's basically run by Hezbollah at this point. But Lebanon is where Tyre and Sidon were. Okay? And they were known also as a great sea power. Okay? So early in the development of the Mediterranean basin after the flood, Greek peoples settled all around the coastlines of the Mediterranean. They were called the Sea Peoples. And they settled everywhere. Settled cities all over the place. They mixed in with the Philistines. They settled the different islands. They settled in Turkey. They settled Syracuse, which is a city that is on Sicily. It wasn't a Roman city. That was a Greek city. They settled North Africa. They settled the coast of France and Spain, what we call France and Spain today. They weren't called that then. And then along came the Phoenicians, and they traded. Okay, they built big navies, and navies to protect their trade. Because that's what they were. They were merchants who traded over the water. And so they were a great merchant city. They were extremely wealthy. Because, you know, it's not the people who produce something that usually get most of the wealth out of it. It's the people that trade it. Right? Whenever there was a silver or a gold strike out here in the West, who made the most money? Was it the miners? No. It was the guy that came in and set up the general store and sold everything on credit to the miners. The clothes and the picks and everything else they needed. And so it's the merchants, you know, that make the money in every kind of endeavor, at least in our world. And Tyre and Sidon were great merchant cities, extremely wealthy, and they had great power because of their wealth. When you're wealthy, you can build a big navy, you can pay for sailors, and you can defend your trade. And you can, you know, plunder other people's trade. Now, the most famous Phoenician city, at least in world history, is neither Tyre nor Sidon. It's Carthage. Okay? Carthage, which was a city in North Africa, Tunisia, that's a Phoenician city also. It was settled by the Phoenicians. And they're the ones that fought the Punic Wars with Rome, the first, second, and third. And everyone knows Hannibal, right? The name Hannibal, the great warrior, great general. He was a Phoenician general. He was from Carthage. And his name Hannibal means the grace of Baal. And he offered his son on the wall of Carthage in a sacrifice to Baal to gain victory over the Romans. It did not work out. He did cause the Romans a lot of trouble. About 15 years of him running up and down the Italian boot, beating every army sent against him. But back in those days at least, this was before the empire, the Romans were a republic, and they were no quitters. So they did everything they needed to do, and piece by piece they dismantled the Carthaginian Empire, which included Tarshish, which is Spain. Okay, so when you see the name Tarshish in here, that's referring to where today we call it Spain. Okay? And that was controlled by the Phoenicians when the war started, but the Romans took it from them. So while Hannibal's in the Italian boot marching up and down, but he can't take Rome. He keeps beating the armies they send against him, and then eventually they just avoid him. But they won't give up. In the meantime, they're sending armies out to conquer each piece of the Phoenician Empire. Eventually, they have Carthage isolated, the city itself, they surround it. He leaves Italy to go back and defend against Scipio Africanus, who was the Roman commander. He got the name Africanus because of this. His real name was just Scipio. And he lost. The Romans won, and that was the end of that. And then a few decades later, the Romans decided Carthage was just too dangerous to be left alone. So they razed the city to the ground, sowed the ground with salt, sold everyone into slavery, and that was it for Carthage. But that was a Phoenician city. It was one of these. Okay? Now God here is pronouncing judgment on them. If you look in your Bibles in Ezekiel chapters 26, 27, and 28, you don't have to turn there right now. I'm just telling you where to find it. You will find God's other specific judgments on Carthage, or on Tyre and Sidon. Tyre was a city that was on the coast and on an island off the coast. Okay? So it was a city with two pieces to it. And, you know, they used ships, of course. They were a sea people. They used ships to get back and forth. Now, God says in Ezekiel, if you go through the chapters, you'll see, he says that the city on land will be destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, and it is. But then he describes the destruction of the city out on the island, and he says that eventually that city will be wiped clean off the island, like it's flat and swept clean even of dust. and that fishermen will dry their nets on it. Well, that didn't happen under Nebuchadnezzar. Alexander the Great did that part. He came along much later, and the city on the coast had been conquered by Nebuchadnezzar. After he had sent Israel back into the land, that city was rebuilt, but it was never the same. But the island portion of the city had never been conquered. It was about a mile off land, I want to say a mile, and that's a long ways if you're crossing the ocean, or in this case the Mediterranean Sea, which might as well be the ocean. They're all connected. And it was a walled city. It was a big place, very difficult to conquer. And Alexander just didn't have any ships. He just had a bunch of soldiers. So he built a causeway out to them. It took 3 years. They literally just picked up boulders and threw them into the ocean until they were up enough they could walk on them. And then they'd go out and keep doing that in front until they got to the city. Then they took it. And he did. He killed all the men, sold all the women and children into slavery, tore the city down brick by brick and threw it all into the ocean and left it flat. And to this day, fishermen do dry their nets on it. So that's all described in Ezekiel. Now, why does any of this matter? Well, you got to remember that Israel is the center of God's plans, right? Everyone knows that, right? The United States is not the center of God's plans. Israel is. Now, in this dispensation, Israel's on the shelf. God is not dealing directly with Israel. What's happening in Israel right now has nothing to do with God. He is not involved other than to the extent he's making sure the nation survives. Okay? But there are no prophecies about that. There are no predictions. That's a normal conflict between peoples who hate each other, which occur around the world all the time, regularly. It's a big deal in this world because people make it a big deal because a lot of people hate Jews and a lot of people want cheap oil from the Arabs. So those two things go together to cause what is an obvious right and wrong situation into accusing Israel of misbehaving in one way or another. But what's going on in Israel today is not part of these plans other than the laying of foundations for what's going to happen in the tribulation and then millennial kingdom. But God's program is centered in this earth on Israel. And so it's the things around Israel that matter the most to him. You notice he almost never talks about Rome. You notice that? Did Rome cut a bigger figure in the world than Israel? It did. Okay? And yet, God doesn't say much about it because that's not the center of what he's dealing with. His interest in Rome is confined only to how it interacts with Israel. Okay, that's the same with Assyria, Babylon, and the others, as far as nations go. Now, all of these peoples are his, whether they know it or not. We've already seen the prophecies that describe Assyria and Egypt both being established as the children or as God's creation, right? Now, Tyre and Sidon, there may have been other merchant cities that were more wealthy in the world, but they weren't right next to Israel. These were. And so they impacted Israel. Anyone know where Jezebel came from? Everyone knows who she was, right? Ahab's wife, Northern Kingdom. Where'd she come from? She came from Sidon, but really the two cities are basically the same. She was the daughter of Ethbal, who was the high priest of Baal. Okay, that's why she was such a big Baal worshiper. And she brought all those priests of Baal with her into Israel. At that time, the king's name was also Ethbal. So there was a king and a high priest. They were different men. They had the same name. We see that a lot, actually, not just in the Old Testament. We see that in history. Those kinds of things occur all the time. But it can get confusing if you're not aware that they had the same name. But anyway, Jezebel was a Phoenician. That's what she was. And then she and Ahab had a daughter. Her name was Athaliah. Okay? And does anyone remember Athaliah and what she did? So she married who? Anyone remember? Because I don't. I'm asking honestly. It was one of Jehoshaphat's kids, right? Anyway, she married the king of Judah. Not Joash. Jehoram, I think. Anyway, she married the king of Judah. So when he became king, the queen of Judah, not Israel, the northern kingdom, but Judah, was Athaliah, half Phoenician and a Baal worshiper. And when her husband was killed, when Ahab died and Jezebel was killed, her husband happened to be north up there. And he ran on to, what's his name, who was doing all the killing? Daniel? Jehu. And Jehu killed him too. You know, he got in the way. And so Jehu just killed him. Jehu was like that. He killed a lot of people. And so she was left alone, and she took over as queen regent. She had a child, but she took over as queen regent. And then guess what she did? Does anyone remember? What's that? Well, that was later. What'd she do first? She killed all the seed royal, all the descendants of David. Okay? She missed one. I think that's Joash, right? Who the priest takes and hides. So one of the women in the nursery took one of the babies and hid him. When the soldiers from Athaliah came in to kill all of David's descendants, took this baby and hid him, and then they turned him over to the temple, and the priests raised him in hiding and prepared him to take the kingdom back, which he did do, and they did execute Athaliah. When they declared the new king, she comes into the temple while they're declaring the new king, long live the king. She comes into the temple yelling, treason, treason. People. Anyway, that was clearly one of Satan's programs to try and upend the line of David. He knew the prophecies. He knew the Messiah was going to come through the line of David. He had to be a son of David. And so Lucifer was definitely trying to cut that line off. Okay? And he used one of his Baal-worshiping women to try and do it. Didn't work out for him. So that's who Tyre and Sidon are. They're Baal-worshiping Phoenicians. They sacrificed their children to Baal. They were warlike. They were merchants, and they had a great navy. All right, so it starts out, howl ye ships of Tarshish. Now, Tarshish is Spain. The Phoenicians had planted cities in Spain. Just like the Sea Peoples had done, the Phoenicians had planted cities all around the Mediterranean. And they had planted some in Spain, and that's where they would trade back and forth from. And Spain would deliver raw materials generally to the cities, and those would be transported to Tyre, Sidon, and Carthage, and they would turn those raw materials into finished goods. That they had really good artisans. So tin and iron, brass, that kind of stuff. So, for it is laid waste, so that there is no house, no entering in. From the land of Chittim, it is revealed to them. What is Chittim? Well, some people think Chittim is Syracuse, the island of, not Syracuse, Ceylon. No, that's the wrong one. That's the one off India. It's that little island just south of Turkey where the Turks and the Greeks have been fighting over it forever. I can't remember the name of it. Anyway, some people think that's Chittim. It seems clear to me from other passages that Chittim is actually referring to Rome. Okay? But in any event, it's another place to the west across the water. It says, be still ye inhabitants of the isle. Where you see isle in the Bible, it depends on the context. The word means either an island or a coast. In this case, he's talking about a coastline, okay, which is where Tyre and Sidon were placed. Thou whom the merchants of Zidon that pass over the sea have replenished. Who is it that they've replenished? Chittim and Tarshish. Right? That's who they were trading with here. They trade with a lot of other people too, but those are the two it's referring to. And by great waters, the seat of Sihor, the harvest of the river is her revenue, and she is a mart of nations. Sihor is an Egyptian city. It's on the Nile, and it was a primary trade city for grain from Egypt. Egypt was the largest grain producer in the Middle East and in the Mediterranean at this time. They don't remain that forever, but at this time, they were the breadbasket of the world, and that grain would be traded out of Egypt everywhere. And, it was all just along the Nile. You can't grow anything out in the desert there, But along the Nile, you can, particularly when it would flood, which it did every year. And that's how they would water the fields. Be thou ashamed, O Zidon, for the sea hath spoken, even the strength of the sea, saying, I travail not, nor bring forth children, neither do I nourish up young men, nor bring up virgins. As at the report concerning Egypt, so shall they be sorely pained at the report of Tyre. Now, Egypt already had judgment pronounced on it earlier in this book. Now it's being pronounced on Tyre, and he's simply saying the nations are going to, it's going to hurt them to see what happens to Tyre and Sidon. Now, this makes sense. When the world is relatively stable for a period of time, or at least the local world that you're involved with mostly, when you see the stability of it and the systems that have maintained everything for so long, when you see them break down, that bothers everybody, right? It just does. When we had COVID, we had a breakdown in our transportation networks, right? We couldn't get goods in and things like that. Does everyone remember all that? And then you had runs on different products and you couldn't get them refilled. That's not normal. That had never happened in my lifetime. Now, I think it happened back in the Great Depression era for you ancient people that were alive then, like Mike. Okay? But that hadn't happened in my lifetime. So it was very weird to see that breakdown as something that we just took for granted, right? That's what happens when a city like Tyre, that's been around for hundreds of years and is exceedingly wealthy, when it gets wiped out, that is not normal. That catches people off guard. They're not used to that. They can't trade with it anymore. They can't make money from it anymore, right? The cities over in Tarshish, where are they going to sell their stuff to now, right? And so it isn't just the city that goes down, it's everyone that they're connected with. There was a time before World War I where people didn't think that war would start because they believed that the trade that was going on between the different European nations, between England and Germany, and between Austria and France and Russia, because they all traded with each other a lot, okay? They thought that was just too interconnected. None of them would risk that. Well, they were wrong, right? Yeah, trade will not stop war, just so you know. Never has, never will. And so Tyre, no matter how much trade it has, is not going to be protected from conquerors. Okay? And they're not, they're just little cities they're big cities, but they're just cities on the coastline. They're not big empires, right? Carthage built itself into an empire later because of what happened to Tyre and Sidon. Okay, it made treaties with the Numidians across the North African desert. You know them as Berbers. And then with the tribes in Spain, which were all Germanic tribes at that time. But they made treaties with them. But they did that because of what had happened to Tyre and Sidon, and they felt threatened by Rome. So they were trying to counterbalance that. That was wise to feel threatened by Rome, because Rome was a threat and eventually destroyed them. But these cities, they literally just existed on the strength of their trade. Now, here's the interesting thing. Who had made it possible for them to be wealthy? Anyone? Come on, it's an obvious answer. Who makes it possible for anyone to have anything? God, there we go. God had blessed them, right? I mean, clearly that's what happened. There's no one on earth who's successful at anything that God didn't provide for that. Just none. Every good gift cometh down from the Father of lights, right? And so it was his blessing on these people. Now, he loves Tyre and Sidon. He's going to pronounce judgment on them. But when we get to the end of the chapter, you'll see in the kingdom age, he reestablishes them. And he takes all their trade for himself. Okay? But they thought they had done it. They thought, it's my wisdom, it's my skill that has made me successful or made me wealthy. Now, it is true, men have wisdom and they have skill. We do. Okay, to deny that would be foolish because it's just true. We do. God gave it to us. It's not of us. He gave it to us. And even with that wisdom and skill, you will not succeed unless God smooths the path. You won't. Okay, so it's all about him. Well, they were very proud. Verse 9 says, "The Lord of hosts hath purposed it to stain the pride of all glory, and to bring into contempt all the honorable of the earth." Now, Tyre traded with the honorable. That means the wealthy. That's what it's referring to, the wealthy and the powerful. And why is God pronouncing judgment on them? Because they're proud. Now, that is not the only reason to have judgment pronounced. There could be many other reasons. I don't know if Sodom and Gomorrah were proud. They probably were. But certainly, in the modern world, the cult of the homosexuals is very prideful. Right? I mean, what do we call this month? Pride Month? Utter nonsense. You should be ashamed. You should be absolutely ashamed. But they're not. They're brazen-faced and proud. And so I'm sure Sodom and Gomorrah were proud. And they had other problems. They were violent and bloody. They mistreated people who were just passing through. So there were problems beyond the fact that they were a collection of perverts and queers. But that's the real reason they were judged. So let's be clear, that is the heart of it. So it isn't just pride that can get you judged, but pride will definitely get you judged. Okay? It just will. So if you want God to be your enemy, get proud. Right? God resisteth the proud, but giveth grace unto the humble. That's written to believers. Okay? He's simply saying, even as a believer, you can let pride take over, and you can become proud, and then God becomes your enemy. He resists you. Not your enemy in the sense that he's going to send you to hell. You can't lose your salvation. That's not what we're talking about. But he will begin to resist you. Anyone in here want God resisting them? No? Okay. So we don't want to be proud. Turn over to Proverbs 16. And look at verse 18. Pride goeth before destruction, and an haughty spirit before a fall. Better it is to be of an humble spirit with the lowly, than to divide the spoil with the proud. Spoil, of course, is that's been taken, been seized from others. Okay, you've taken it prisoner, it or them. And so, the proud, they conquer their neighbors and divide the spoil. And God is saying it's better to be of a humble spirit with the lowly than to be that guy. Now, in our world, we put the title "the Great" on the end of names. And what everyone that we call the Great, what is he famous for? Yeah, every last one of them. Alexander the Great, Peter the Great, Ivan the Great, one after the other, conqueror, right? Which means he's simply the biggest robber around. That's what they are. Okay? In the world's eyes, that makes you great. Not in God's eyes. God says it's better to be lowly. Okay, to sit with the humble than to be one of those guys. Now, the world will never see it that way, but that's the world's problem, not ours. And we should have our eyes focused on what God says. Let's turn over to James chapter 4. By the way, who's going to be the final conqueror? Who's going to be the great? The Lord is, that's right. Jesus is. He is going to conquer. And if you do cast your lot in this world with the lowly and the humble, he'll raise you up. That's what he'll do. So here in James chapter 4, verse 6, but he giveth more grace. Wherefore he saith, God resisteth the proud, but giveth grace unto the humble. The humble simply means you submit to God. Submit yourselves therefore to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw nigh to God, and he will draw nigh to you. Cleanse your hands, ye sinners, and purify your hearts, ye double-minded. Could you imagine James in a megachurch pulpit? Boy, they'd want to run him out on a rail. He says really hard things. Be afflicted and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning and your joy to heaviness. Humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and he shall lift you up. Okay? So this is how God approaches pride. You know, in the Sermon on the Mount, he's blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth, right? Meek are those that just simply put themselves at the back of the line. They let others go ahead of them. Not just literally, although it is literal, but also just figuratively. In everything that goes on in life, they do not insist on their own rights. If let's say you like something a lot, like, I don't know, ice cream. Say you like some type of ice cream. And you buy it because you want to have some for a few days, and your spouse gets in there and eats it. How are you supposed to respond to that? Or your children, either one. What's that? Right? You're not supposed to say, well, I bought that for myself. Right? You're supposed to say, okay. Does it really hurt you? Do you really miss out on anything? No, you don't. Don't listen to him. No, you don't. Okay? Let others have things ahead of you. That's the idea of being meek. Okay? Jesus was, it says of Moses that he was the meekest man on all the earth. Okay? He led Israel. And he led it. I mean, he was in charge. If you don't think he was, go back and read Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Moses was very definitely in charge, at least on earth. I mean, he took his commands from God, but he was in charge. And he was the meekest man in all the earth. He didn't insist on his own right. Watch the people challenge him and watch what he says. He never seems to say, who do you think you are? They say that to him, right? The sons of Korah. You take too much on yourself, Moses. Are we not all children of the Most High? Right? That's what they say. And Moses is like, okay. You bring your fire tomorrow before the tabernacle and we'll see what happens. Right? He does not, if God chose them, he'd have been fine with it. Now, he knew that wasn't going to happen. But meanwhile, he's intervening for them. They're saying that about him, and he's asking God not to destroy them. Okay? That's what meekness is, and that's what Jesus was. He was a meek man. He will not be meek in his return. It's very clear that's a whole different animal when he returns. He comes as a judge and a conqueror, wages war and establishes his authority, and he does it to put down all, going back to verse 9 here, all of the glory, to put down the glory, or the pride and all their glory, and the honorable of the earth. He's going to establish a whole new order of business. Okay? Do you remember when the disciples were disputing who'd be greatest among them in the kingdom? And what did Jesus say? He that'll be first will be last, right? That's how it's going to be in the kingdom. So he's going to flip everything on its head. Everything that we know, the way we see things, is going to be turned upside down. So you can't run for president in this country. This has been true for a long time. You can't run for president unless you're some form of sociopath. Okay? I'm not saying that to put him down. We have to have presidents, right? Our constitutional order demands one. Got to have a president. But the fact is, to run for president, you have to honestly believe that you are the best choice for that job in a country of, what is it now, 300 plus million. Really? You think we can't find someone better? Of course we can. But do you think Trump thinks he's the best person for that job? Of course he does. Of course he does. That's why he's running, right? Do you think that W thought he was the best person for that job? How about Al Gore? Or Clinton? Or Reagan? Just keep going back. All of them believed in the entire country they were the best option. Well, that's a lot of pride. That's not how things are going to go in the kingdom. Men that think that way of themselves will not have any authority. None whatsoever. And so the Lord, he talks about that in the Sermon on the Mount. That's why he says, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Right? That's how the kingdom's going to operate. That's not how the earth operates now. When we look around and we see all that pride and glory and pomp that's out there, we all see it, right? It's real. It exists. Don't underestimate the reality of the world's glory, because it is real. It was offered to Christ by Satan. You remember in the temptations? It was real, but it's passing, okay, because it's based on a lie. It's based on man's pride. And God is going to put all of it down. Okay, he is the only thing that is going to last forever or be eternal, him and his values. And so he is going to upend all of this. But of course, the pride of earth is based on our sin nature and the first sinner, Lucifer. He led, of course, Adam and Eve into sin. And if you turn over to Ezekiel chapter 28, this is part of Ezekiel's prophecy against Tyre. In the middle of it, he addresses Lucifer with reference to Tyre. Now, why am I doing this? Okay, I just want you to understand Tyre is a picture or a type of the world's wealth and glory. That's what it is. And we're going to see that God condemns all of that. Worldly wealth, worldly glory, worldly pomp and honor, God condemns it. We're not to have any truck with it. And so Tyre is a type for that. Now in Ezekiel chapter 28, verse 11, moreover, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, Ezekiel's special title is Son of Man. The Lord takes that title in the New Testament, but Ezekiel is given that title by the Lord in the Old Testament. Son of man, take up a lamentation upon the king of Tyrus. Tyrus is Tyre. And say unto him, thus saith the Lord God. And you'll see there that's Adonai Jehovah, Lord God. Now, this person he's going to speak to is clearly not a man. Because look at the beginning here. Thou sealest up the sum, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. Thou hast been in Eden, the garden of God. Well, had the king of Tyre, who was probably 70 years old, ever been in Eden, the garden of God? No. So he's clearly talking to someone else. In other words, he's speaking to the power behind the throne. The spirit being that's actually running this operation. Now, I don't believe that means the king of Tyre was possessed. He might have been. But I don't think that's necessary. God is speaking through the operator, or through the king of this system, the mercantile system that's there, to the actual power that makes that system operate in this world, that elevates pride. Okay? And that's Lucifer. What does he say? Thou hast been in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was thy covering. The sardius, topaz, and the diamond, the beryl, the onyx, and the jasper, the sapphire, the emerald, and the carbuncle, and gold. The workmanship of thy tabrets and of thy pipes was prepared in thee in the day that thou wast created. Again, does that sound like a human being? What human being do you know that's caked in precious stones and has a pipe organ built into him? Okay, this is clearly an angel of some kind. Okay? Thou art the anointed cherub that covereth, and I have set thee so. Thou wast upon the holy mountain of God. Thou hast walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire. I have no idea what those things are, just so you know. I don't think anyone does. Thou wast perfect in thy ways from the day that thou wast created till iniquity was found in thee. That's the beginning of sin. Iniquity. What does the word iniquity mean? Lawlessness. That's what it means, rebellion. He was a rebel. He decided he didn't like what God was doing. He was going to do it his way. Which, I mean, okay, so you read the description here, which means he knows God, right? He knows God made him, and he thinks he's going to overthrow God. How could you possibly think that? Well, pride. Now look at the next verse. By the multitude of thy merchandise, they have filled the midst of thee with violence, and thou hast sinned. Therefore I will cast thee as profane out of the mountain of God, and I will destroy thee, O covering cherub, from the midst of the stones of fire. Thine heart was lifted up because of thy beauty. Thou hast corrupted thy wisdom by reason of thy brightness. I will cast thee to the ground. I will lay thee before kings, that they may behold thee. So, profane means worldly. That's what it means. It doesn't mean wicked, at least not in the Bible. We use it today to mean wicked, but that's not what it means. When you read profane in the Bible, it means worldly. It means your mind is on the things of the world. You remember when Peter, talking to Jesus, the Lord was telling them, I've got to go up to Jerusalem and be killed, and then rise there. And Peter said, not so, Lord. What did the Lord say to him? Get thee behind me, Satan, for thou savorest not the things of God. Right? Why? Because Peter had his mind on the world. He was being profane. That's what that's talking about. Now, Lucifer has built the world system. Who is the prince of the power of the air right now? Lucifer. Who's referred to in the New Testament as the god of this world? Lucifer. All right, so this system we live in, he built it. It's his. It will promote and advance pride. It will, because that's him. It's made in his image. And notice he talked about merchandise here. Satan is a big merchant. He makes a lot of deals. Okay? He'll promise people all kinds of things. And I'm not talking about a face-to-face transaction. I'm just saying he'll convince people that if they'll go this route, that they'll get great things from it, things they really want. But that route lies destruction. And that's the path they'll take. He's the one selling them that. That's his merchandise. Okay? And Tyre is a type of that. Tyre is a city built entirely on, going back to Isaiah, is built entirely on that principle. Now, if you get down, let's see, to verse 15, back in Isaiah 23, you see it says, it shall come to pass in that day that Tyre shall be forgotten 70 years. According to the days of one king, after the end of 70 years shall Tyre sing as an harlot. Now, it's not clear which 70-year period this is referring to. So it appears that the Assyrians conquered the coastal piece of Tyre. They didn't destroy the city like the Babylonians do later, but they conquered it. They took it under their control in about 700 BC, and they held it till about 630 BC when the Babylonians came along. That's 70 years. But they didn't destroy the city or wreck it, and it wasn't really forgotten. But it was a 70-year period when they were under someone else's thumb, right? The Babylonians come along with Nebuchadnezzar, and he destroys the city, the coastal city. I mean, he absolutely destroys it. Sells everyone into slavery, levels it with the ground, and leaves it that way. But it's rebuilt later. It's not, we can't tell from the historical record if it was exactly 70 years later. But it started being rebuilt several decades later, and then eventually the coastal city was reestablished. It was never as wealthy and powerful again. And then when Alexander comes along, he puts an end to it once and for all. And so I think it's probably referring to the Babylonian destruction about this 70-year period, because at that point, Tyre had lost its power entirely. It wasn't conducting any kind of trade for decades. But notice how God describes them. After the end of 70 years shall Tyre sing as an harlot. So the city is an idolatrous city. We all know they worship Baal, right? And God uses that term harlot to refer to false religion, right? Sometimes he uses it to refer to an actual harlot. But when he's talking about a city or an organization or a preacher or something like that, it's almost always false religion, Well, it's always false religion, okay? Because it's talking about replacing the true worship of God, which is pictured as a marriage, a chaste marriage, with a harlot, right? And so Hosea, read the book of Hosea. It's all about that. And so when he refers to Tyre singing as an harlot, that's clearly what he's talking about. It's their idolatry. They were very covetous and they were idolaters. The Bible tells us in the New Testament that covetousness is idolatry. In 2 Corinthians, right? Covetousness is idolatry. And that simply means you've got something in your heart ahead of God. And for the believer, we can't be covetous. We can't have idols. Okay? And so we have to reject that entirely. Well, the entire world system is built on idolatry. It's built on covetousness. The American free market, what is the motivating principle? Get all you can, right? Make as much as you can, pile it up. And of course, we have people like that now. When he's talked earlier about the traffickers who are the honorable of the earth, think today, who are the wealthy people we have today in Europe and the United States and China and Russia who have billions? They're the honorable, they're the traffickers of the earth right now. They are today what the men he's referring to were then. And unless they repent, they have a similar end awaiting them. In verse 16, he says, "Take an harp, go about the city, thou harlot that hast been forgotten. Make sweet melody, sing many songs, that thou mayest be remembered." So, does idolatry and wickedness, do they have their own songs? Yeah, they do. There's a lot of music, of course, dedicated to false gods. Just go to India, okay? Go to Japan. But it's even more than that. It's simply that this world system produces its own music, and it does have sweet melodies. It just does. Okay? The world system knows what it's doing. Now, when I say that, I'm really talking about Lucifer. The people involved, I don't think they know generally. Their eyes are on their thing. So when you have the apostate megachurch preacher, he doesn't understand everything that's going on. He doesn't even understand all the wrong he's doing. He just knows, I got to sell this message to get as much money as I can out of these sheep out here. I got to fleece them I got to cut them as close to the skin as I can. Right? And so that's what he's doing. Deeply wicked, by the way. But he doesn't have a big plan in his mind about it. Now, there's one back here that does. He's behind them, just like he was behind the throne of Tyre. Okay? He knows what he's doing. And he's happy to let them have a few $1 billion for a couple decades. You think that's any skin off his nose? Lucifer doesn't need money. It's not his, he has no interest in it. So they do produce great songs. CCM, of course, is really making headway today. It is absolutely part of the world system. Okay? We shouldn't call it CCM because it isn't. It is not Christian contemporary music. It is worldly music. It's just the world's music. Okay? Using words that are Christian. The thing that makes it even worse than the world's music is right up front. They'll tell you what they are. You know from the first line in a song, generally, because they don't hide it. AC/DC, Highway to Hell, are they hiding anything? They're just saying it right out up front. The CCM guys, they've got you on the highway to hell too. But they'll never tell you that. You're on your way to heaven. That's what they'll tell you. Okay, that's what makes them the worst. But I think that this reference here is to the world's music and its power is something we can apply to what we see going on in megachurches and Christian music today. Not Christian music, but that's what they call it. Now, at the end of these 70 years, God drops a hammer on Tyre again, and they're done. But then notice verse 18. and her merchandise and her hire shall be holiness to the Lord. So there is a point at which God is going to restore Tyre. And they are going to trade again. But not for themselves. It's not going into their coffers. It goes to the Lord. It says, it shall not be treasured nor laid up, for her merchandise shall be for them that dwell before the Lord, to eat sufficiently and for durable clothing. They will be providing the food and the clothing for Jesus' court in Jerusalem, in the millennial kingdom. Turn over to Isaiah 60. We'll start in verse 5. Then thou shalt see and flow together, and thine heart shall fear and be enlarged, because the abundance of the sea shall be converted unto thee. The forces of the Gentiles shall come unto thee. In the Bible, when it talks about the tribes of the earth, it's referring to Israel. When it talks about the sea, it's referring to Gentiles. Okay, in prophetic language, but only in prophetic language. You can see it right here in the context, is what he's talking about. So, you know, in I can't remember where it is. I think it's in Matthew where the Lord says, then shall they see the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and the tribes of the earth shall mourn and look on him whom they have pierced. You remember that passage? The tribes of earth is Israel. Those are not Gentiles. Okay, but the sea are Gentiles. That's why we know the beast is a Gentile, because he arises out of what? He rises out of the sea. Verse 6, the multitude of camels shall cover thee, the dromedaries of Midian and Ephah, all they from Sheba shall come, and shall bring gold and incense, and they shall show forth the praises of the Lord. All the flocks of Kedar shall be gathered together unto thee, the rams of Nehoath shall minister unto thee, they shall come up with acceptance on mine altar, and I will glorify the house of my glory. So we see here that the Gentiles in the kingdom age are going to worship the Lord. They're going to bring their goods and services to him. Okay, just as Tyre will. Now go to Psalm 45, and then we will be done. Verse 12, and the daughter of Tyre shall be there with a gift. Even the rich among the people shall entreat thy favor. This is a prophecy, this Psalm 45, has to do with the Lord Jesus, and it has to do with the establishment of his kingdom. Look at verse 6. Thy throne, O God, is forever and ever. The scepter of thy kingdom is a right scepter. Does anyone recognize that from the New Testament? Hebrews chapter 1. Now, this entire chapter is about the kingdom, and that's why we see here again, Tyre shall be in the kingdom and will be worshiping the Lord. But going back, this verse here, 6, he says, thy throne, O God. That word God, of course, is Elohim. In the New Testament, it tells us in Hebrews chapter 1 that the Father says that to the Son. The Father says, unto the Son he saith, thy throne, O God. So who is Jesus? Well, he's Elohim. And he's Jehovah. Right? It's part of the teaching that the Bible gives us on the triune Godhead, the three persons of the Godhead. And they're all God. They cannot be divided. You cannot separate them. Good luck trying to. Good luck trying to understand it, because I can't understand it. I don't think anyone does. Okay? But people like Mormons will tell you Jesus is Jehovah, but he's not Elohim. Well, he most certainly is. Okay, so when you deal with a Mormon, the best thing to do is take them to Hebrews 1:8, read the verse, then bring them to Psalm 45:6, and read that to them. And then point out to them that the word "O God" there, the word God, is translated from the Hebrew Elohim. And that Hebrews says that's talking about Jesus. I've done this many times. You know what they always tell me? Well, the King James Bible is correct except where it's mistranslated. Because they just don't want to face this. But it is what it is. All right, so that's the prophecy on Tyre. It's going to be destroyed. its initial destruction is only going to be partial. Then it'll be reestablished after 70 years. Then it's going to be destroyed once and for all until the kingdom, when God will rebuild it, reestablish Tyre, because he loves Tyre and the people of Tyre. And then their merchandise will be for him. Okay? So don't have any part with this world system. Lay not up for yourselves treasures on earth. Right? Isn't that what Jesus said? Now, I know he's speaking to Jews under the law, and he's really referring to the kingdom age, because it's part of the Sermon on the Mount. I'm aware of that. But I think it is absolutely applicable to us. I do. You can trust him. He knows what he's doing. Okay? And if you end up having to tighten your belt, well, so be it. He knows what he's doing. If I have to tighten my belt, so be it. I'd like to be able to tighten it more. But the Lord knows what he's about. Okay? And we can trust him. What we can't trust is money. Do not put your faith in money, ever. All right. Any questions? Comments? Since Grant's not here, we're going to end on time rather than go an extra 10 minutes.